Aim, arguably one of the core fundamentals of Valorant that is agreed by the vast majority of the player base. But what if I were to tell you that it doesn't really matter? Now don't get me wrong, aim is important, but to an extent. You see, most players associate aim with mechanics, which technically isn't wrong, but aim isn't all mechanics. Mechanics is an umbrella term for a lot of things, and at the end of the day, aim doesn't really matter if you're constantly fighting a 1v5. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot more factors at play in a fraction of a second duel that ultimately predecide the winner and the loser. I'm gonna show you guys these factors, and once I cover this, you'll be convinced that aim isn't everything. So let's start with movement. I'd honestly argue movement is more important than aim, especially in higher elo. If you were to compare a player who only has raw aim versus a player who only has movement, I'd bet 8 times out of 10, the player with movement would win. So why is movement so important? Well, first off, movement makes it so that you're harder to hit in gun duels. That alone lets you win more fights. But more importantly, movement dictates how accurate you are. Movement is essential because I believe it is the gateway to high elo. There's a difference between just moving in the game, like using your controls, and moving with your aim. Anyone, even irons, can move, but only a small margin of the player base can actually utilize their movement with their aim. Now Corey goes over this really well, so you should check out his movement guide. But if there's any basic tips I can give you, is to try incorporating strafing if you're just beginning with your movement and actually taking your time to ensure your crosshair is aligning with your target. Also, be sure to learn tracking. Now let's move on to positioning. Positioning determines if your gunfight is a good gunfight or a bad gunfight. A lot of players complain about being instantly one-tapped and automatically associate that with players just having good aim. Whilst that may be true, the actual culprit is probably your positioning. Let's take this scenario on Haven. The enemies are doing a fast push on A, pushing up both long and sewers, and you're playing backside behind boxes. Now this position isn't bad, but there's a better one. If you were to tuck more towards graffiti, you have a better off angle on both sewers and long as they push out, and you also have cover to hide behind. One thing I want to highlight is that you should never be playing in these aggressive positions if you're the only one on site. Some agents such as Chamber and Jet that have abilities to help them get out have a bit more leeway to play aggressively, however most of the times you probably want to play retake with your team in this scenario. Now let's take another scenario on C site this time. You're holding long and the enemies are pushing up. This position is bad because first off, you're in a really pre-fireable angle, and if they were to push on site, you would be stuck in that corner. Now some better alternatives would be here, here, and here. These are much better spots to play in because the enemies are less likely to expect you to be there, and your angles are much more isolated. Now let's do one for attacking. So you're pushing up C long, and you want to entry for your team. Anywhere in the dead center or near the boxes is a bad position to entry. This is because you can literally be shot from any angle. When you're entering, you want to gain space for your team, and honestly an entry like that just has no value. Here's a different approach to entering. As you walk up long and reach the choke point, you want to take space aggressively, but also not too aggressively to the point where you're trading your life away. A good way to do this is by using your abilities to cut off angles and isolate your fights. For example, you could use Jet to updraft and dash into that low box, or updraft and dash onto the Radiant Knight box. Then you can use your smokes to isolate angles and fight. Now you see that you're only exposed to 2 angles, which you can cut off with your smokes, and you're more likely to gain space off your entry. A general rule of thumb is to never be overcommitted to a fight. However, if you are taking these aggressive fights, you should always either have cover or an escape ability. And of course, always isolate your ones. Finally, let's cover timings. Timings are so important and can single-handedly win rounds. The reason why timings are so vital is because you're catching an enemy off guard. Every player has gotten timing before, but how can you create your own? Timings are heavily reliant on playstyle, comps, maps, and positioning. Once you have an understanding of this, you can create your own timings. However, before I talk about this, I want to first cover something called space trading. Space trading is the concept of, well, essentially trading space. For example, if there's 5 people pushing up A lobby, someone on your team should take the initiative of pushing up mid or B to gain the lost space on A. This in turn creates opportunities for flanks and timings. But why tell you when I can show you? As you can see in this clip, I'm currently sitting mid waiting for a timing. If we take a look at the map, you can see most of my teammates are concentrated near A main. This is where the concept of space trading takes place. Since the enemies are rotating towards my teammates, mid is free, meaning I have a good timing. The circumstances that allowed for this to happen is that most of my teammates were on A, meaning they're not expecting a lurk mid. They aren't regaining their lost space and they're just rotating, which means they're overcommitting, and also I'm taking my time. I cannot stress enough how important it is to take your time, especially when you're going for a solo play timing. However, if your flank works, this is the results. As promised, I hope after showing you guys these factors, your view on Valorant isn't so one-dimensional anymore. So try incorporating one of these into your future games, and I can almost guarantee you'll find more success in your ranked matches. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.